Anyway, thank you all for coming today. Braving the rain, a couple of people have commented that we must be pretty good if we can get that many people to show up in the middle of a miserable day. First 45 days of this year have been full of surprises. From our point of view here in the forum, the launch of President Trump's deal of the century ranks first and foremost and most fascinating. There's been a lot of commentary on the deal so far. A lot of people believe it's not viable. Others do. Whether or not we do, it is important that the deal be discussed and discuss the value of the deal, the substance of the deal, and how other parties perceive it. This deal strikes a first in all previous efforts by the United States to broker or manage a comprehensive settlement for the almost a century of conflict between Palestinians and Israel. Unlike previous initiatives, the plan does not seek to persuade the warring parties to work out a resolution between them. Rather, I would label the plan as an American-imposed settlement that allows the parties to work out some of the smaller details. It unilaterally settles key elements of contention on refugees, the status of Jerusalem, and the question of a two-state solution. In my view, most importantly, for the very first time since the UN Partition Resolution of 1948, it sets forth a map. There's now a map on the ground for the first time in almost 70 years or 80 years. It also rather uniquely sends a bill of $50 billion to the oil-rich countries of the Gulf to pay for its implementation. The announcement timing takes advantage of the current turmoil in our region of the Gulf, so that a coordinated negative response that we would have expected such a plan to elicit a couple of years ago is no longer in their interest. But what exactly is in the interest of the Arab states of the Gulf? We have here a panel uniquely qualified to address the deal of the century. We regret that Dr. Grace Wormenboe had an emergency that prevented her from joining us today. She would have analyzed the legal implications of the deal, and, oops, I'm the one who should never do this. And by the way, that's a warning to everybody else. Please turn your phones off. And I did not arrange this to go off exactly this time. She would have analyzed the legal implications of the deal and the interaction of its effect on Israeli elections and the reaction of other states, including the Gulf states. Hopefully, our panelists will fill the gap of her absence. You have the biographies, so I won't take up valuable time in reading them again. Very briefly, Dr. Aaron Miller, who has a 30-plus year of association with the peace process and whom I also regard as a close personal friend, will analyze the deal as a basis for the discussion. Ambassador Alon Liel, a seasoned Israeli diplomat speaking via the technological marvels from Israel, will discuss what Israel expects in both positive and negative terms from outside players, from other countries in the region, noting again, I would hope that the Gulf countries have gotten an invoice to pay for it, and the Palestinians have an obligation to negotiate on the basis of the U.S., what some would call a decree. Dr. Shafeeq GHABRA, an academic and intellectual from Kuwait, and currently, he's not the host exactly, but is the prime guest on a very, very popular Kuwaiti political program called the Sanduq al-Aswad, or the Black Box. It will give us the perspective on the deal from the Arab point of view, whether it is the Arab politician, the Arab intellectual, or the man of the street. Each will present for about 12 minutes. I will chime in to keep them on schedule. We will try really hard on this. At the end, we will begin a discussion based on your questions. A couple of minor housekeeping rules. You will find cards on your chairs on which you can write your questions. Please indicate your name and affiliation. As an option, you may indicate to which panelist you have directed the question. I'll fill them out and hand them to one of our staff who will be circulating. Please watch your handwriting. If you're a doctor writing prescriptions, I'd rather you didn't do it this time. Thank you very much. Aaron.
Patrick, thanks so much. It's an honor to be here, Shafeeq, with you and Alon via the wonders of modern technology. Just a comment on context so you'll understand my perspective. When I left the State Department in 2003, Colin Powell gave me two pieces of advice. The first piece was don't ever try to come back. That piece I took willingly. We had our chance, and 20 plus years of working on a single issue without a lot of success was enough. And I'm not associated with anyone's campaign, nor do I intend to return to government. Second piece of advice Paul gave me was don't look back. And the experience could be alternatively very painful, but I rejected that one, and I traded the private conversation of diplomacy for the world, limited though it is, of the public conversation. I felt an obligation to look back. I don't think history repeats. I think Mark Twain was right. It rhymes, and we should look for the rhythmic patterns of the past to avoid repeating those mistakes. That's point number one. Secondly, and unfortunately, looking back, now freed from the constraints of trying to fix things, honestly leads to a pretty, my words here, annoyingly negative analysis, not just of the pursuit of Arab-Israeli peace, but of the region generally. And my analysis for the last 17 years, freed from the constraints of trying to fix things, I'm much more interested these days in understanding the world, because I think if you don't try to do that, you're never going to, quote unquote, fix it. And this has led to, again, an annoyingly negative view of many things, particularly this particular problem, which I worked on for a half a dozen secretaries of state. So I'm going to divide this presentation into three kinds of sections. Number one, Mr. Kushner sought my advice, to his credit, I would argue, in terms of looking backwards. And in the course of the last several years, we had a series of meetings in which he asked for my advice, and I gave it to him. So I'm going to outline the four core pieces of advice I gave him, all of which he, quite understandably, in my judgment, ignored, since by my own account, we did not succeed. Now, whether anybody could have succeeded in managing, let alone resolving, the Arab-Israeli conflict's core challenge, a conflict-ending agreement, and I choose my words very carefully here, conflict-ending agreement between Israelis and Palestinians, is a highly arguable proposition. But he ignored these four pieces of advice. That's number one. The second question is why this initiative, and third is what would be the likely impact. Four pieces of advice to Mr. Kushner, and I say this respectfully. I said to him that if he succeeded, I would be the first to break open a bottle of champagne, but if he put something on the table that wasn't deemed to be credible, more on that in a minute, that I would be the first out there saying why it wasn't credible. Number one, I said to him that I wish my father-in-law had as much confidence in me as his father-in-law had in him, because he'd given him mission impossible. I said, whatever you do or you don't do, the basic ownership and responsibility for taking the core decisions on the 6 core issues that drive this conflict, border security, refugees, Jerusalem, recognition of Israel as the nation state of the Jews, and end of conflict and claims, those decisions cannot be taken by the United States. Those are up to the parties, and I pointed out to him that it's no coincidence that the 3 great breakthroughs in the history of this process, there have only been 3, were all achieved without the foreknowledge of the United States. Moshe Dayan shows up in October of 1977 and says to my predecessors at the State Department that he had been meeting secretly with Sadat's vice president, which laid the basis of what would be his trip to Jerusalem. I was on vacation in August of '93 when State Operations called and said, you better come back quickly because Secretary Christopher is about to head to California to see Foreign Minister Perez and Foreign Minister Holst. We knew there was an Oslo channel, but we didn't know it was a decision-making channel. And the Israelis and Jordanians have been negotiating for decades without the knowledge of the United States. And as much as we'd like to take credit for the October 1994 peace treaty, that was their doing, not ours. So we can't come up with the will, I said to him, to make Israelis and Palestinians make these decisions. We could make matters a lot worse. And I cautioned him to be extremely careful about the prospects of purporting to put out a comprehensive solution to this problem when the gaps between the two sides were galactic in character, and the mistrust and misunderstanding was as deep as the Grand Canyon. We didn't need another failure. Number two, I said, don't ignore the past. You don't have to remain a prisoner of the past, but you can't pretend that it doesn't exist. I mean, Faulkner, writing in Requiem for a Nun, is right. The past, I think he said, was never over. It was never even past. And if there's a statement that is true in life, it is true for Israelis and Palestinians. They must, to some degree, escape the precedents that they themselves have created and the pain and the realities in order to resolve this. But it has to be done in a way that respects the past and does not trivialize the issues which are very much informed and shaped and made more difficult by past conflict. Three, I said to him, don't be Israel's lawyer. Now, I had resurrected this phrase for James Baker. It was not my phrase, even though I've been sadly tarred with creating it. It came from Henry Kissinger's memoirs. Baker loved it because it suited his purposes. Your client is an agreement which furthers the national interest of the United States, which means you must lawyer for both sides. If you fail to understand that, there's no way you will reach a situation where you could narrow the gaps to be able to bridge them. And finally, he asked me a question. What would success be? And I said flat out, success would be the following. If the day after the plan comes out, Israelis, Palestinians, Arab states, the Europeans, the entire international community says, you know, there's stuff in here we don't like. But the fact is, the Trump administration has honestly and fairly struggled with the past, with the issues, with the sensibilities of both sides, and laid the basis for, my words here, an equitable and durable solution. There's no perfect justice. Not a religious person, but there's no perfect justice this side of anyone's definition of heaven. But there may be an equitable and durable solution. If that's the reaction to your plan, you've succeeded beyond your wildest dreams and imagination in this current environment. Well, the plan as rendered, 181 pages. And when he said to me that this plan, this was a year ago, would be 60 to 80 pages, I said to him, you know, this is virtually unprecedented. In the history of the Arab-Israeli peace process, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, we've never, ever put out a document this long, this detailed. Is this really the way you want to go? Yes, because everything that was done in the past was too abbreviated, focused in a couple pages or more on a number of core issues. We need to explain how we got there. We need to provide great detail. And clearly that's what they've done. So the second piece, why now? And I asked this question. I don't have a really good answer to it, but the question is this: why at a time, 6 weeks before the third election in a dysfunctional Israeli political system, against the backdrop of an impeachment proceeding, weeks before the onset of American primaries, in an election that will could conceivably be one of the most consequential in American history in November. With the gaps between Israelis and Palestinians, just take the issue of borders or Jerusalem, or add refugees, so wide and mistrust so deep. Why put this plan out? I reasoned in the end that there were two explanations. One driven by what I call the mundane. That is, proof of life. We've been working on a plan for 3 years. There have been any number of occasions when we wanted to put it out. We didn't. There's an expectation. My father-in-law wanted a peace plan. It's important that we put one out. And the other variation is politics. I think they viewed, rightly or wrongly, in March 2nd, maybe a canary in the coal mine test of whether or not this plan will help Mr. Netanyahu. But I think there was an element of reason that Mr. Trump wanted Mr. Netanyahu around in November for his own election. And all politics that count are derivative of the president's politics. And then there's that was the mundane. Then there is the grandiose explanation, which I've been arguing from the beginning, sorting through what their motives have been. I really do believe that their effort, which is a vision, not an operational document, was to fundamentally reshape and reframe the American approach pursued by the past 3 administrations with regard to a two-state solution. And if you look at the policies, the way they've evolved on 3 core issues, Palestinian statehood, Jerusalem, and the issue of refugees, you see that's precisely what they've done. Now, whether or not this is irreversible, whether or not hopes for a two-state solution have been irrevocably and irreparably crushed by this vision is unclear. I can't see around the corner. I have 2 children, one's 40 and one's 38. I still believe in the prospects and possibilities of a two-state solution. But in order to do so, you need 3 things. I told Mr. Kushner this as well, and you don't have them, and I'll conclude my comments. Number 1, you'd need leaders who are masters of their political houses, not prisoners of their ideologies and their politics. You do not have that. Second, you'd need a sense of ownership. There's this wonderful philosophical observation that in the history of the world, nobody ever washed a rental car. The truth is, it is a profound piece of philosophy. Normal people do not wash rental cars because people care only about what they own. And there's insufficient ownership. I pointed out to you that the breakthroughs that have occurred were all owned by the parties themselves before the United States even knew about them. Finally, you'd need an effective mediator, an administration that knew what it was doing and was prepared to apply ample amounts of honey in the way of reassurance, but also ample amounts of vinegar. Because nobody's going to plant a tree in your honor if, in fact, you succeed in brokering an agreement. Ask Henry Kissinger, Jimmy Carter, and my former boss, James Baker. People could come to appreciate their accomplishments, but it's part of a very, very painful process. Final comment, and I choose to remain not an optimist. I hate that word. I borrow a phrase from Jack Kennedy, who described himself as an idealist without illusion. That's where I am on this. You give me 2 of the 3 factors that I've identified, leadership or ownership, and an effective third party that knows what it's doing, I would venture to say that you could at least create a sustainable basis for a negotiation that would test the proposition that, in fact, separation through negotiation into 2 states is still possible.
Well, nice to be here, and maybe building from what I heard from David, as I view the deal, and as many people look at it in the region, in the Middle East, in the Arab world, it's not a deal. It cannot be a deal. A deal is between participants that are in a process of a negotiation. This is not a deal. It has a colonial nature in the language. It imposes in the way it is structured. It sees the indigenous population as on the other end of receiving the decisions, the final decisions, the verdicts. It doesn't seem, I mean, they call it a Palestinian state, but it's not. No sovereignty, no geography, limited lands, divided lands, part here, a part there, a corner here, a corner there, and they want to call it a state. It has no borders, it has no continuity. This document legalizes illegal settlements. It has taken the Palestinians ages before they were able, in the mid-1970s, to come to grips with certain changes and agree to a Palestinian state. But they have not agreed that settlements will be eating up quite a chunk of the fertile lands, of the geography of the West Bank, the area where a Palestinian state is supposed to stand. So the Jordan Valley, 30% of the West Bank to be taken, Jerusalem, already annexed, taken. Settlers are about 800,000 in between Jerusalem and the West Bank. So what does that leave for a Palestinian state? I'll go through some of the language that I saw in the document, this vision that was presented in the first part of the document. It says in the document, a realistic solution will give the Palestinians all the powers to govern themselves, but not the powers to threaten Israel. And who is threatening? When you really look at the ground, what do you see? Siege, settlements, walls, miserable life for Palestinians. There is no way Palestinians, a disarmed population, can threaten Israel. And Gaza in total siege. And therefore, it's this to be a document presented by the U.S. is a total departure of every administration in the past regarding a sense of neutrality and a sense of trying to understand the different parties. I mean, we see in page 3, the Oslo Accords, however, left numerous key issues unresolved. And they have resolved the issues now. Who's going to implement that? I mean, Jerusalem, borders, independence, etc. I mean, in another statement, while we are respectful of the historic role of the United Nations in the peace process, this vision is not a recitation of General Assembly, Security Council, and other international resolutions. So you throw all the international resolutions, you throw all the international legality, and call it a peace process or a peace, a document to lead to peace. It says as well on page 6, while the Palestinians have never had a state. I mean, on what basis the Palestinians have never had a state? The Palestinians were part of a larger Arab population nation that has been in Palestine since 1,400 years, since the Arabs came to Palestine. But those Palestinians who were in Palestine 1,400 years mixed with those who came and created the Arab population of Palestine. So there was a population before. It was Christian, maybe it was Jewish. Like some of the Zionists who came to Palestine felt that many of the Palestinians may have been Jews in the past. Because people, I mean, who are the Muslims today? They were either atheists or Jews or Christians before they became Muslims. So who are the Palestinians? They are a combination of many civilizations, but they are the indigenous population of the country. So you say they've never had a state to justify. This is a language to justify certain decisions and beyond any human value. In another place, no government should be asked to compromise the safety and security of its citizens. This is especially true of the State of Israel, a country, since its establishment, has faced continuous, etc., etc. I mean, this is an American document. I mean, I can understand this is an Israeli document. I will buy that. This is an Israeli document. And then the Palestinians will present a Palestinian document, and the Arabs will present an Arab document, and America will be somewhere able to work out the issues. How does this really help peace, lead us to peace? In another place, the United Nations cannot ask any country, let alone the State of Israel, a close ally, to make compromises that would exacerbate an already difficult security situation. On what basis? Withdrawing from territory captured in a defensive war. So now 1967 is a defensive war. I mean, if we read all the books, or many of the books, on 1967, it wasn't a defensive war. And Nasser was not intending to attack. I mean, whether it's 48 or 56 or 67 or 82, there is a big issue here. So the State of Israel and the United States do not believe. I mean, this is a document supposed to make peace, where America is now stating, the White House is saying, the State of Israel and the United States, they are one party, do not believe that the State of Israel is legally bound to provide the Palestinians with 100% of the pre-67 territory. This is a total, I mean, it's a total annihilation of everything that stood for the negotiations in the past, or even the Oslo Accords, or anything related to it, or all the work that David has been involved in, among many others. Now, it also says that nothing significant, no improvements for the people of Gaza will occur until there is a ceasefire with Israel. Then the full demilitarization of Gaza and the governance structure that allows the international community. So demilitarization, how does this happen? You kill 20,000 people, you occupy Gaza, you destroy it, you make it, put it, I mean, totally on the ground, and then what else? How does this work? What does this do? We've seen the Israeli army in Beirut. What did this do? It expelled PLO, but it created Hezbollah. Israel created Hezbollah in a way because it occupied a big chunk of Lebanon. So Hezbollah was the response. It was the one that filled the vacuum after the PLO. What would this do? What would it create? And then there is a whole place where they speak about the triangle communities, which is part of proper Israel, 1948-49. That this area, part of it, has about 400,000 Palestinians in 1948, what sometimes they call Israeli Arabs. They're supposed to be transferred with the territory to the Palestinian territories. These are Israeli citizens. How does this happen? And what does it mean? So we're talking about ethnic cleansing again, or we're talking about transfer of population. We've seen that in the Nakba in 1948. Where would this take us? And to what extent would this conflict become much more intensive and problematic? And then here there's a statement in the document. The State of Israel, the State of Palestine, and the Arab countries will work together to counter Hezbollah, ISIS, Hamas, etc., etc. I mean, putting all of that together. Everywhere there's Hamas is a terrorist organization. I haven't seen Hamas doing anything worldwide. I've seen Hamas do in Israel, and I've seen Israel put Gaza to rubble. Does this make Israel more terrorist or less terrorist, or does it make Hamas more or less? I mean, why Hamas? Why not Israel's violence? There is no place in this entire document that uses the word occupation. The only place it uses the word occupation is for people to have occupation, I mean to have a work, but no occupation. So, end of all claims is in the document. I mean, that totally erases so many issues that the Palestinians are supposed to sign for an end of all claims, and that the prisoners and martyrs' families should not be receiving any payments to take care of them. I mean, did this what happened with the Irish Republican Army, or is this what happened in South Africa for all of those who fought against apartheid, that the families whose fathers or mothers or brothers died in the struggle are not supposed to receive anything and or compensation? What are they supposed to do? I mean, go back to the fight? Isn't this part of the solution at the end of the road? It is a hateful document when you look at it. It is a document full of hate. It imposes. It sets the stage for conflict. It gives the Palestinians zero security. Zero security. I would argue that the Israelis can come and say, this is our new bottom line now. All the annexation that took place, all the Jordan Valley, all the settlements, but also we are interested in this town and this area and this neighborhood, and we're going to put another 30,000 here, another 40,000, and we can squeeze you a little bit more. Why not? I mean, if might makes it right, then that's the way. If you give nothing, no security to the occupied Palestinians, then yes, you can go ahead and make this your minimum again, and then we have to work hard on that minimum. It's an apartheid situation. I had the chance in 2012 and 13 and 16 to visit Palestine. I had the chance to go to the West Bank, but I also was able to go to what have become Israel proper and to visit Haifa and Jaffa, being myself a citizen of Kuwait, born in Kuwait, raised in Kuwait, but yet somebody who belonged to a family that were refugees of the 1948 war. I was able to go see where my father worked in Haifa, who has never been allowed back, and they say nothing about even the right, the symbolic right, even first relatives, second relatives. I was able to see the house of my mother, which is still standing in Tiberias. I was able to see all the remnants of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who were in Palestine, the villages that were destroyed, about 400 more of them totally eradicated. And yet, you're supposed to forget all of this, but how can you if there is no dignity, no level of parity, no level of remorse, no apology, maybe both ways? And yet we see in the document that Jews from the Arab world who came to Israel are equal to the Palestinians who were forced out in the Nakba. And this is not true. The Jews who came from the Arab world, Israel wanted them to come, worked very hard to make sure they come. And it was part of building that state. For the Palestinians, they didn't want to leave. They were forced to leave, and they desperately wanted to go back. And they were not allowed to go back from day one during the war of 1948 and 1940, as it extended to 1949. So it's very sad that the U.S. has gone in that direction. And it's an apartheid situation, which means basically, on the other hand, Palestinians will have to put their act together, go back to the drawing table, reactivate their national liberation movement, understand that they need to be very democratic in the approach. They have to be very inclusive in the way they deal with everybody who stands with them, whether it's the international community, whether it's people across the world, whether it's civil society, whether it's Israelis and Israeli society, whether it's Jews, whether it's Christians, have to be open the way South Africa finally was able to manage a struggle. I cannot predict, will the end of that struggle be a true Palestinian state, or will it end up with some sort of an arrangement that is based on respect and equality and real rights for everyone as citizens, as people who have rights in the territory and in the place they own and they've lived in and they belong to. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I watched you all the time and heard everything. What I'm going to say is obviously having some overlap with other speakers, but not too much because this topic is so wide and there is so much to discuss. First of all, I'm totally out of the picture. I'm not an official anymore. The only meeting I had with somebody from the American team was with Ambassador Greenblatt, it also happened only because I deal a lot with the Israel, Jewish-Arab relations inside Israel, and he wanted to hear about my shared society project. And when we met, I had no idea that the issue of Israeli Arabs will end up being part of the plan, with the idea of removing some of them and shifting them into the future Palestinian state. But I'll try to be as professional as possible, but I have to tell you, I'm among the people opposing the plan. I don't think it will be implemented, but by no means anyone can underestimate the implications of just publishing it. They are enormous, enormous, as were the other moves of the Trump administration, like moving the embassy to Jerusalem and other things. But this plan has changed the circumstances dramatically. If I look back, and there was a suggestion not to look back too much, but Israel 30 years ago, when I was still very involved, wanted to add to the territory of Israel 3% of the West Bank and exchange it one by one with territory inside Israel. Several years later, under Olmert as prime minister, Israel wanted 7% or close to 7% of the West Bank, still exchanging it one by one with territory inside Israel. And now, with the Trump plan, we get 30%. 30%, and nobody speaks on compensation on one by one, although there is some compensation in land, with land in the Negev and so on. What it does to the Israelis or to the Jewish Israelis, no leader in Israel will be able to come to the Israeli public and tell them, let's get less than 30% after we got it from Trump. You will need a Mandela to convince the Israeli public to get 29%. The 30% has become the starting point of the new negotiations. I'm not speaking only on the settlers or the right wing in Israel, even the center in Israel. Why not to get 30% if we can get it? And if the superpower gives us 30%, and nobody seriously objects it, not the Europeans, and not even the Arab world. Foreign ministers of the Arab League said they don't accept the plan, but nothing here was shaking. No earth was shaking. So it's not only that we got 30% of the West Bank, it's also that the international community is somehow accepting it. So this is a new Israeli starting line in future negotiations. Now, let's look at the Palestinians. When we offered 3%, it couldn't work. When we offered 7%, to take 7% in Olmert Abu Mazen time, it also didn't work. So 30%, who is the Palestinian leader today or in the future that will be ever be able to tell his people to withdraw from 30% of the West Bank? Impossible. Again, they maybe will need a Mandela, but even a Mandela will not be enough. So it created circumstances hanging there, even if it's not implemented, that are not enabling the resumption of talks on the two states. So what are we facing? It's a blow I don't want to say mortal blow, but very close to it, to the idea of the two states. And everybody is now considering the alternative. So the alternative, obviously, is a joint Israeli-Palestinian state, or what we used to call a one state. More and more Palestinians understand they cannot get a viable independent state, and the shift will be, don't give us the land, toward the policy of don't give us the land, and give us our rights. Now, no intention on behalf of the Israeli leadership to give citizenship to 4 million Palestinians, in addition to the 1.2 million Israeli Arabs that have the citizenship already. So we are trying to think of this new state, one state that will be created. This map is an unbelievable map, because the only place where a future Palestinian state will meet another state but Israel is a very small border along Rafah area with Egypt. But all the rest of the Palestinian territory, if it's in the West Bank or in the Negev, is fully surrounded by Israel. Not only Israeli army, not only military, civilian land. It's all surrounded by Israeli land. So, in fact, what is this future Palestinian state that I don't think will ever happen? It's enclaves populated by Palestinians, maybe with an additional enclave of 250,000 Israeli Arabs. Now, you look at the map, and I don't want to use the word apartheid, but it was already mentioned. But I want to use the word Bantustans. It reminds the South African Bantustans, where you have Palestinians that maybe will have their rights on issues like transportation or maybe education, but nothing like security for a third. And how will this function? So I since the debate on the Palestinian side and even on the Israelis is not shifting yet from land to rights, but the issue of land has become impossible. So now we cannot, at this stage, with a plan on the table, we cannot discuss not the land or national rights and not the civil human rights too. So we are really stuck. I want to move a little bit to the international community. You are very interested in the reaction of the Gulf states and so on. The problem with this plan is not only that the mediator is unbalanced. The mediator didn't speak with one of the sides. And on the other end, the dialogue with the Israeli side was very, very intensive. And in fact, the plan was written with Israelis. And the Americans do not deny that, for instance, the moving of Israeli Arabs to Palestine was a Netanyahu idea. And professionals who look at the text found spelling mistakes inside of names of cities and so on that are typical Israeli spelling mistakes. So, in fact, you spoke with one of the sides intensively, and you simulated what the other side will need, and this can not work. So first, the mediator was unbalanced, but the other thing is that this is a plan balanced based on the balance of power between Israel and Palestine. And this is the balance of power. Israel is stronger in every parameter. Take military, technologically, economically, just name it. And the Americans brought a good camera from the air, took a photo of what's happening on the ground, including 500,000 settlers on the ground, and came and told the world, look, this is the balance of power. Let's be realistic. Let's this is the balance of power. But balance of power is a critical factor when you're the war. One side can win, the other side will lose, but balance of power is not a critical factor when you make peace. When you make peace, you have to consider other things. I know that justice is a big word, but also elements that will enable functioning that is not only based on balance of power, especially when you are probably building a one state in which people will have to work together every day and build friendships. And I don't want to speak also on reconciliation, but maybe one day reconcile in an agreed way. So the balance of power picture is not enough. I want to add another dimension because I now do not see you and I don't see the guy that shows me how minutes I have as he did to the other speakers. I want to speak on the international community.
You'll get some more time. Thank you.
It is a big surprise to many of us professional diplomats that after 52 years of occupation, Israel enjoys so much support internationally. I know that here and there you speak about the BDS, and just now the list of 112 companies that were published working in the territories. But look, 2 days ago, UN Security Council, you heard the debate. I don't know how many of you heard the debate. Most of the countries spoke, even sometimes harshly, against the plan, a lot of criticism, but they were not courageous enough or able to vote. The combination of Israel and the United States, or the United States and Israel, is so deterring on the international arena that no mid-sized, definitely not small country, no small country that is having diplomatic relations with the United States and with Israel can vote today against Israel or against the United States. So when you look at the international community, because Israel is a strong country today, has succeeded tremendously in security, in its security, intelligence, technology, everything. No individual government, by the way, even the big ones, wants to quarrel with Israel, especially when it is backed by the United States. So the Palestinians, when you look at the overall picture, they were defeated not only militarily, economically, they were defeated also diplomatically. And to have an agreement between two sides that are so unbalanced, when the international community cannot balance, is deciding that in fact everything that Israel would like to do on the ground, it can do today. Even take the issue of annexation. There is a backing for Israeli annexation. Kushner said, don't do it before the elections. But if he wins, he will definitely do it with after the election in a one-sided way. Why? Because the United States wins, and there is no international community that has any leverage, any serious leverage on Israel. I want to come to the Middle East in 2-3 sentences. The two key countries in the Middle East are Egypt and Jordan. As long as Egypt and Jordan keep their excellent relations with Israel, that I would even define as an alliance, especially with Egypt. There is an Israeli-Egyptian security alliance. As long as they keep the diplomatic relations, as long as Egypt keeps its pressure on the Palestinians, especially the Hamas, Israel has, in fact, the Middle East. It's not the Gulf countries. The Gulf countries are ready to do business with us, are ready to host Israelis now, but are not ready.
Dr. Ambassador Liel, anyway, I think we've lost that last part.